In this Godot tutorial, I'll teach you how to animate your characters using a sprite sheet and the animation player node. Let's get started. In front of me, I have an empty project and we'll be adding an animated player together. We'll go over to scene and we'll create a new scene, and it's going to be a other node, and specifically a kinematic body, as that is the preferred node type for a player character. The kinematic body will come into the scene tree with an error as it requires a collision shape or polygon. I'm going to go for a collision polygon because I'm working with isometric art, but this tutorial is applicable to forward angled, top down and platformer type games as well. The collision polygon is also an error because it requires us to draw a polygon on the screen, but we don't know how big that polygon is supposed to be yet because we don't have any sprite to guide us for the size. So we'll first add the sprite sheet, and after that we'll address that error. So we'll add another node, and that is going to be a sprite node. Now in the top left here, bottom left here in the file manager, I have on the assets art character sprite sheet, I've added a skeleton mage.png. I've of course done that through the Windows Explorer and downloaded this beforehand. Now drag this to the texture property here in the inspector. Now this sprite sheet has 8 rows for each for the different directions this is animated in. So this is an 8-directional sprite sheet. Top, left, bottom, right, and all the diagonals in between. We also have 28 horizontal frames per direction for the various animation that this sprite sheet consists of. We have 4 frames for idle, we have 8 frames for walking, we have 4 frames for attacking as a melee type, we have 4 frames for attacking a cast type, and we have 8 frames for a death animation. Now we want, of course, with an animation player to cycle through all these different frames at the right time. We first have to make sure that the sprite node knows the characteristics of this sprite sheet, because for the sprite sheet this is just a 1000 by 4000 pixels texture. So we're going to go over to the animation properties here in the inspector, and we'll tell this sprite node that you are a texture with 8 vertical frames and 28 horizontal frames. Now it knows that it can cut out animations based on those areas. If I now cycle through my frames, this is frame number 0, that's going to be the top left one. And if I now press this button up, you can see the skeleton cycle through the various frames. And this goes horizontally from left to right. And as we approach frame number 27, that is the last frame, as we started with frame number 0. So this is the last frame on the first row. Now when we go to frame number 28, we'll get the next direction, and we can cycle through all these various animations until this one died, and then we get the next direction. So that's how this frame works, and this frame property is what will change in the animation player. Now that we have this character, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this up a little bit until the feet touch this Y0 line. That's important when you start Y sorting your various elements. Not important for this tutorial, but I don't want to skip it because else I know somebody of you is going to be smart enough to mention it in the comments. Now with that done, we can now add the collision polygon, because now we have a sort of a guidance on how big this should be. We can now take this skeleton and fiddle around with it, how big this needs to be. So I'll first add a diamond, and then I'll add a little bit of ovalness, of roundness to the shape. This one's a little bit too much. That's good enough for the tutorial. Now with that done, the last couple of things we can change here is change the name into player, and we can add the animation player to the scene tree. Now when the moment we add this animation player, this animation editor pops up on the bottom here. If that doesn't pop up, or if you ever want this to be gone, to be rid, you're done with your animations, you can simply click animations on the bottom right here, and that will open and close this panel. Now that we got the animation editor up on the screen and we pretty much finished the node tree, we can start working on our animations. This animation player and the animation editor with it are very powerful tools. You can do a lot with it. You can do so much with it that it is impossible for me to cover all the content in a single tutorial. So in this tutorial, we're going to restrict ourselves to changing the frame of the sprite sheet and creating some really cool looking animations. You can, though, do a lot more with it, and I'll make sure to add more tutorials in the future explaining those other possibilities to you. So we're going to be adding these animations in 3 different methods. I'll show you 3 ways how you can add these animations to the animation player. The first one is going to probably be the most straightforward, but probably not the fastest. The second one is a little bit faster, and the third one is great for duplicating animations once you got the first one set up and duplicate them into the different directions. So let's get started with the first one, straightforward, adding an animation through only the animation editor. To start off with any animation, we pretty much always have this button right here, animation. We click it, we create a new animation. No surprise there. We have to give it a name, and we have to give it a name that is easy to recognize in the code, that we can call it quite easily. Now, we usually start first with the name of the animations. That will be idle. That's the first animation in the horizontal line, so why not start at the start? And we'll have to add a direction. Now, there's 2 ways you can name your animations for your direction. You can say top, left, right, or you could abbreviate that, T, P, L, B, and something in between. I personally prefer to use the wind direction because, I don't know, in 7 years of game development, I got used to that, I guess. So I'll use west. Now, when we click that, the animation editor here will populate with various options and things. We have a timeline. And that timeline is partially grayed, and that gray area means that's how long the animation will play for. In this case, 1 second. We can set that up right here. So if you want this animation to play longer, for example, 1.2 seconds, you'll see that now we have added a little bit of gray area there. We also, if you have a very long animation, for example, you have an animation of 5 seconds, you can't see everything. So that's where this slider on the bottom right is for. With this, you can make the timeline bigger and smaller. Now 5 is not what we need for this, so I'll set it back to another value, zoom out a little bit. Then here underneath you also have the snapping options. These snapping options allow you to add keyframes on certain intervals. If you have specific intervals in mind that you want to add your animations to, setting the snap is usually a good thing to do at the start. For the idle animation, for example, I want things to snap 0.3 seconds apart from each other. Now that we have that all set up, there's one more option that's behind, next to the seconds right here. You have this little button, animation looping. And of course, for our idle animation and our running animations, we want to continuously loop through that animations, because running, of course, is continuous, and just like the idle animation needs to be continuous. Things like attack and of course dying, those are things that you do specifically not want to loop. For this idle animation though, we will want to loop. Now we're going to add a track to it. And when we add a track, we can add various tracks. Like I said, this animation player can do a lot. The 3D call method, Bezier, audio playback, animation playback, we're all not going to do, but know that there's, like you see, many options. So for example, you can add playing a sound with add the special effects, maybe when a sword swing happens, or maybe even you want to call an entire method in the script through the animation player. It's all possible. For now, we're going to be using a property track. So we're going to be adding keyframes for properties in the node tree. And as you can see, the moment I click it, a pop-up window appears with the node tree we have created at the beginning of this tutorial. I'll select the Sprite node, as that is the node that our property frame is located on. We'll click OK, and a new pop-up appears with all the properties of that specific node. And you can see it already here. We set, of course, the V frames and the H frames in the beginning of this tutorial, and I showed you how we can cycle through the frame to show the various frames in the sprite sheet. So we want the frame property. We want to change that using various keys. Now, with that set up, if I were to zoom out just a little bit, we can now add keys to this timeline. You can simply do that with a right mouse button click. When you click, you can insert a key. Now, of course, I'm going to be adding several of these keys, and I'll be adding them every 0.3 seconds, as that is also what the snap is determining. So even if I were to click somewhere else, the snap will automatically place it in the closest 0.3 interval. Now, as I'm adding these animation keys, you can see that they are connected with a gray line. any animation, or any key I should say, any key that is connected with a gray line means that the values of those keys are identical. There's no change between the keys. If I were to click one of these animations, our inspector here on the right hand side of the screen will change, and now we can see the value. So we have a value of 9 in this case. That is not what we want because the animation starts at frame number 0. So we're going to set that to 0. We'll set this one to 1. And as you can see, the gray lines start to disappear between our keys in the animation timescale as we're changing this up. So we have 0, 1, 2, and 3. Those are the 4 frames of our animations. Do note that the frames start at 0, so that might sometimes be a little bit, well, annoying is exaggerated, but might be a little bit frustrating. Now, if I were to press play, we can now see the animation. But the animation is a little bit jagged, like it goes down smooth and then pops back up. The reason for that is that sprite sheets are drawn with the most effective resource use in mind. That means that no duplicate frames will ever be present in a sprite sheet if that sprite sheet is drawn with somebody that's more experienced, let's say, drawing sprite sheets. So the sprites I say, or the frames I should say, that go from 0 to 3, we can also loop back through those frames to make a smooth movement going back up. So I'll add 0.6 seconds. I'll add another 2 keyframes. And I'll set this from 0, 1, 2, 3, and then from 3 we go back to 2, oh that's already set up actually, and back to 1. Then when 1 is finished, the animation will loop back around and it will start at 0 again. Now if I press play, we'll see that the skeleton moves down and up in a smooth way and the animation looks complete. So this is good. Now we can go over to the second method of adding animations, making a combination or making use of a combination between the editor and the inspector. Let's get started on that. So the second method is a combination between the animation editor and the inspector. We'll first create a new animation, and this will be the walk animation for the skeleton. So that will be the walk west. Once we've got that, we can now select, or when you have added animation, you can select any node in a node tree and you get all these little key icons behind all the various properties, and you guessed it, what those keys are going to be doing. We're going to set the frame to 4, so the first frame in the walk animation, and we'll add this little key, and we'll get a pop-up if we want to create a new track for the property frame and insert the key, and of course yes, we want to do that. It's also going to ask us if you want to use Bezier curves. That is if you don't want to linear interpolate between 2 keyframes, but maybe parabolically go from one to the other, or maybe in a waveform or whatever. Not important for us at this moment in time, but possible for more special animations, I guess. Now that we have done that, you can see that automatically added the frame property track of the sprite node to the animation player. And I've also added, or it has also added, the first animation right here. Now also, as we have clicked that, the animation has automatically gone up, or the frame has automatically gone up by 1 as we have clicked that button. Now the only downside is that our time indicator hasn't skipped to the next snap, so we have to set that ourselves, add that to little 4 and add the key. When we do that, you can see that the time indicator of the animation constantly skips up with the next snap set to 0.1, and automatically our frame gets updated. So we can simply add all the frames just like that up to 11. Now with that set up, if we were to change the time frame to 0.8 and we set it to loop as is the walking animation, we press play and now we're walking. But we're walking super fast, and I've done that on purpose because I want to show you how you can change this. If you don't like something, you're like, oh, this is too fast, this is too slow, how do I change it quickly? Well, now you would say, let's say we want to double the time. So we're going to say with a 0.6 animation. You can simply drag these animations. Now it's handy to set the snap as well to 0.2. You can simply drag these animations now in the timeline to where you want them to be. So now I'm going to be snapping them 0.2 seconds apart instead of 0.1, and now when I play it, it is a much slower, more natural movement of the character. So just like that, we have added another animation, and now we have a idle animation and a walking animation. But we have this idle and this walking animation only for the west direction. We still have the other 7 directions to go, and you can probably imagine that this takes quite some time if you have to do this for every single frame. But once you have your first animation set up, you can duplicate them into new animations for other directions. And you can do that very efficiently by using a little bit of math inside the inspector. So let's go over that, and I'll teach you how you can very quickly add duplicates. To add a duplicate, I'm going to do that for the idle animation. Now, to switch from the walk animation back to the idle animation, you simply click the title right here. That's going to pop up all the animations that this animation player currently has. So we're going to switch to the idle animation. Now, to duplicate, we're going to go to animation and we're going to press duplicate. That will create a new animation now with idle, west, and then between brackets, copy. Immediately after duplicating, I'm again going to go to animation. I will rename this immediately, because the last thing you want is have animations mixed up, because, well, then you're much further away from home and it will take a lot more time to fix everything. Probably you have to delete everything. Now that we have added northwest to this, we're going to go to frame number 1 or key number 1. And now, of course, this is value 0, frame 0, because that's how we've set up the previous animation. Of course, this is a duplicate, so it's exactly the same. Now, this value, we know that on the horizontal first line for all the west directional animations, there's 28 frames, 28 H frames. So we know that we start at 0, we end at 27, and frame number 28 is going to be the first animation 1 row below. So we'll simply plus 28. This is possible in Godot in the inspector, and now if we hit enter, the sum, of course, the outcome of that little sum is 28. And the animation is now in the northwest direction. Now, I've selected plus 28, and I've Control-C, Control-Copy that. What I'll now do is I'll pass that into all the other frames. And as I do that, you can see that I'm very quickly, must watch out that you're not got your selected, you don't have the previous number selected, because else you're just overwriting things. And now I've just added everything, we've added 28, and now we have our animation in a northwest direction. We can now very quickly duplicate, rename, say this is going to be the north direction, and now this is sort of 28. We can add 28 to all of these values, and very quickly we go through this row by row, adding all the various animation directions for the idle animation. Now, there's one thing you have to watch out for, and you're gonna make this mistake. Oh, it's not a mistake, it's an error. It might look like a bug. And if you don't know about it, you can look at this for a long time. I'm going to duplicate another time. I'm going to rename. And this will, of course, then be northeast. The danger of this is that when you click in this field and you have your mouse button still pressed and you drag, I'll show you what it does. So I'm clicking, still got my mouse button pressed. So now I'll drag, you see I'm changing the frame number. So what sometimes happens is that you accidentally change the frame before you add plus 28 or however many H frames you have. Now, if you ever accidentally do that, and be sharp at that, because you might get very weird animations with suddenly a very different frame in a different direction in between, just hit Ctrl-Z. That will reset the original value, and then have a go again at adding your animations. So that is something to look out for, and something that's definitely going to happen the first time you're doing this, as you're probably too excited or you want to go too fast, and before you know it, you have, I don't know, an attack frame in the middle of your animation, for idle animation. So just like that, you can duplicate all these animations in here. Now what I'll do, well, I'm not going to bore you with it, I'm going to do it. I'll add all the idle animations, all the walk run, all the walk animations, and all the attack animations for every single direction. So that's going to be 24 animations in this animation list instead of the 4 or 5 that we have right now. Now I'll do that in exactly the same way. The only difference is that for the attack animations, I'll of course have animation looping off, as those are singular animations, after which it should revert back to the idle animation. So I'll do that. I won't bore you with it, and then I'll see you once I finish that, and then we'll add the code to the script of the player to play the right animation at the right time. Right, are you still here? I am, and I've added all the animations to the animation player. We got all our idle animations, all our walk animations, and for the attack animations, since we have a melee and a cast attack, I've chosen to call this melee instead of just attack. That way we can add the cast attack quite easily in the future. Now for activating the right animation at the right time, I'm going to be adding a script to the player node, and that's going to be under the kinematic body, so the main node of the scene. It can be the empty template, and we call it quite simply player.gd. We create that script, and I'll be adding the code in one go to this script. Normally you see me add code in my tutorials block by block, but we'll be making use of a piece of code from my previous tutorial on player movement, specifically click to move. So I'll be making use of mouse movement for this tutorial. So I'll add the entire code, and we'll go over just the parts that are necessary to go over for the animation. If you want to learn more about the movement, how that exactly works, I advise you to follow the link down in the description for the click to move player movement tutorial. So the important parts for the animation are these three variables on the top: the direction, the mode, and the animation. And to explain how this works, let's first go all the way down to the script so you understand what's going to happen. Basically, these two lines right here are sort of handy to know before we go through the rest of the script. What we do is we get the node animation player, so that will be the animation player we've just added all our animations to, and we're going to play the animation. The animation is defined right here, one line above it, as the animation mode with an underscore with an animation direction. Now I've named all the animations on purpose idle, melee, walk, underscore with all their wind directions. So the idle, melee, and walk are the modes, and of course the wind directions are the animation directions. So when you have a look at this piece of code, the animation mode should be walk or idle or melee in a moment, and an animation direction should be, well, wind direction, obviously. So with that said, at the beginning of the script, we set the animation direction and mode to south and idle. That way, when the game loads, idle south will be playing. So the character will be facing the player itself, me as a person, and it will play south idle. Then, of course, the first thing we need to know is what is the animation mode? When are we walking? When are we idling? Well, when we click with the mouse and we have the unhandled input, the event mouse click, then moving becomes true. Moving is a boolean that is defined right here, and this boolean that will activate movement and reset speed to 0 if we stood still. That's of course perfect for us, because if moving is false, we're standing still, we should be playing idle. If moving is true, it means we're not standing still, we should be playing walking. So right here we have if moving is true, animation mode is walk, else if moving is false, animation mode is idle. Now that animation or that moving variable is set to true when we click somewhere, when we are starting to move, and whenever we reach our destination within 10 pixels, then the animation mode is set to false, or the moving boolean is set to false, and thereby we set our animation mode back to idle. So that is it for the animation mode. Then we add an underscore. Now we need the animation direction. In the movement loop, we define the move direction, and that is going to be the degrees, as in the angle between the position of the player and the angle to point destination. Destination being defined as the get global mouse position whenever we click somewhere in the screen. So that degrees that can then be translated into a wind direction. So if that degrees is between 15 and minus 15, we know we have to be walking east. Or for example, if it's between 165 minus and 165, we know we have to be walking west. Now, the values of these degrees might look a little bit off. That's because I'm working with isometric art. If you're working with pure top down, you would go from 22.5 to 22.5 to, what is it, 67.5. The way this is calculated, or why I use these specific degrees, I got another tutorial on that. That's called direction dependent animations, and I'll put a link in the description down there as well. I made a beautiful paint drawing to explain, or even PowerPoint drawing maybe even. I made a beautiful PowerPoint sheet to explain why you have to change the degrees here for isometric art. But the gist of things is that we determine the animation direction based on that move direction, and we're setting the right animation direction through this if else if statement. Now with that all set, we can now add this player with this script. Let's quickly save that. I'm gonna go back to the main scene, that is the game root of this this game. Game root doesn't come standard when you open your Godot project. I've just added a pure empty node game root. There's nothing on this. It's just the first scene that loads. So in my project settings, under general run, the game root.tscn is the scene that loads when the game opens up. And I'll simply add, not a child, I'll add an instance child, and that of course is going to be the player. And I'll drag this player a little bit to the middle of the screen so it doesn't open with the player all the way in the corner there. Now when I play this game, this should all be working. So now when I click somewhere, the player is moving to that direction, and the animation direction that is closest to how that should be looking is played at the right time. Now the moment we stand still, the player also stands still in his idle position, and it remembers that last animation direction from when it was moving. Thereby the right animation direction is also played for the idle mode, as you can see right here. Now all we have to do is add the animation part for the melee combat, and after that I'll have an announcement for the next tutorial where I'll be introducing the animation tree. Now let's get moving on melee. So to add the attack animations, we of course first have to know when are we attacking. So for that we're going to go to project settings, and I've added the attack action to the input map. So now we have attack right here. You can do that with the add button, then you add a key, and I've programmed the right mouse button. So left click for move, right click for attack. Now I've added two variables, and just like we say moving as a Boolean true or false, we now have attacking true or false. And just like we have a move direction, we've also defined a attack direction. Now with that set, we can say under the input that if the action press is not a click, but if the action press is an attack, so that's the name of the function we just added to the input map, we can say that moving is false. We cannot be moving if we're attacking. Attacking becomes true. And the attack direction is going to be the radial degrees get angle to global, mouse position. Then we're going to run the attack function. The attack function, I've already programmed down here, is basically just going to yield the code for 0.4 seconds. That's how long the animation is. And then after 4 seconds, so 0.4 seconds, after the timeout, we're going to set attacking to false. That allows us to move again. And we set the animation mode back to idle. Because, of course, once the attack animation is over, we got to make sure that that animation is then set back to idle. Now for the animation loop, I've made a couple of changes. First, I've shifted up everything one in tandem to the right, and I've done that under an if movement, if statement. So if moving, so it means if moving is true, then we check what the move direction is, and we determine the animation direction based on the move direction. Else, if we are attacking, if attacking is true, then we define the animation direction based on the attack direction. Now the degrees and everything for the rest are exactly the same. So now we're just adding more codes to this and along the line. Also, else if attacking gives us now the animation mode melee, whereas else if moving is now still going to determine the moving true or false with the animation modes walk or idle. Now with this all set, we can play the game again, and now we can attack in the various directions, and we can move, and while we're moving we can still attack. So if we ever come across an enemy, we can really quickly slash or dash out to him, and like that all our animations are now working. Now as I said, I got a little bit of an announcement. This of course is going to be adding up to a lot of lines of code, and it's quite a lot of work, I guess, to do. There's a node we can use, the animation tree, and with the animation tree we can do all of this code through a just like we had the animation editor, we sort of get an editor on when to play which animation based on input. So we'll be in the next tutorial, which is going to come out next week if you're watching this just after release, we'll be taking a look at the animation tree Now, does it mean that all of this was for naught and that you did all of this for nothing? No, it is not, because the animation tree cannot store any animations. The animation tree only activates animations which are stored in the animation player. So you would still have to set all your animations in the animation player, even if you're making use of the animation tree. The animation tree only replaces these long else-if statements in the code for only a couple of lines. So you still pretty much have to do everything that I explained to you in this tutorial before you can make use of the animation tree. That's why I wanted to release this tutorial before I release the next one. So that's it for today, and I hope to see you next week. That was it for today, guys. Hope you like it. If you did, smash that like button, hit subscribe. Don't forget that little bell icon to make sure that you don't miss out on that next tutorial where I explain the animation tree. Now, also, if you're interested about the game development that I do myself, I live stream every Tuesday and Thursday on Twitch, and you can find all the links in the schedule and description down in that description box below. Also, if you're looking for a community of Godot game developers, we got a pretty busy Discord, pretty active Discord with over 100 Godot game developers. You're free to join that. You can find the link in that description box below. I hope to see you there on Twitch or in the next tutorial. And until then, keep on gaming, keep on coding. See you later, guys.